Hello class. When preparing for quiz 3, you should go over the key points and understand them. Point 1. The prosecution's responsibility is to establish a prima facie case relative to the corpus delicti of a crime. Prosecution must establish all the elements sufficiently to hold the defendant to answer. Point 2. Corpus delicti cannot be proven by a confession or an admission on the part of the defendant. In other words, just because somebody says, "I did it," that we can't use independently to convict them of the crime. Such proof must be established independently of any extrajudicial statement. That's what they refer to as a confession, is a extrajudicial statement. In other words, I did it. We still have to prove that, all the elements, independently. All right, point 3, in order for there to be a crime, there must be a unity of act and intent, or criminal negligence. In other words, thinking about committing a crime isn't a crime in itself. There must be some act towards the crime itself. All right, point 4, failure to provide a minor child with necessities is an example of an omission to act as it relates to a crime. In other words, we call this crimes of omission. Point 5, a person may not be charged and convicted for several crimes resulting from one criminal act. An example would be several petty thefts may result in one grand theft. In other words, if a person committed several thefts out of one act and the value was over $950, that defendant would be charged with grand theft then. And we'll talk further about this in a future chapter. Point 6, the definition of proximate cause is an act which is the contributing cause to, let's say, the injury. A defendant is criminally liable if the requisite intent, in other words, required intent, is present and the act or failure to act was the proximate cause of injury or death. Point 7, the felony murder rule means that if any of the principals to a felony kills in furtherance of the crime, all are guilty of murder. And further explanation of that is if anybody dies as a result of committing the crime, all principals share in the guilt. We'll talk further about that in a future chapter. Point 8, intent is the mental element applicable to the perpetrator of a crime. The 3 types of intent are general intent, specific intent, and constructive or transferred intent. Point 9, criminal negligence means entering into an act with the wantonness or reckless disregard for the safety of others. With relationship to intent, it resembles general intent. Point 10, intent may be proved by circumstantial evidence, or in the case of general intent, by direct evidence. An example would be the defendant telling someone of his intentions. The conduct of the defendant before, during, or after the offense can prove intent. Point 11, a crime which involves A, general intent, example would be battery. B, specific intent is assault with intent to commit murder. And C, constructive or transferred intent while committing rape. The victim dies. all involved are guilty of homicide, though no malice was present. Point 12. 3 elements needed to find intent in criminal case negligent cases are: A. The defendant had a duty to perform. B. The defendant's negligent or act of omission was the cause of the injury sustained. And C. The defendant must have the apparent ability to perform his legally imposed duty. 13. The difference between motive and intent is that motive is the reason somebody acts, the reason they committed the crime, while intent is the purpose or resolve to do the act. Remember, the prosecution does not have to prove motive. Motive is never a part of the element. 14, and last, the circumstances where voluntary intoxication is an excuse for committing a crime are where the drunkenness has produced insanity. B, where specific intent is essential and intoxication has negated its existence. In other words, if it's a specific intent crime, the defense could produce evidence that indicates that the defendant could not have formed specific intent due to intoxication. For now, that's all she wrote.